Rolling Stone out this week with just one of those lists that's grist for debate among music fans, and you know I count myself a music fan. So we're going to talk about this here as our Music Monday, and believe it or not, the Beatles.
Rolling Stone magazine was founded in 1967 at ground zero of the hippie subculture San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. Jan Wenner, a 21-year-old Berkeley dropout, published the first issue shortly after the conclusion of the Summer of Love in November of '67. John Lennon's face placed prominently on the cover, kicking off a tradition of plastering rock stars' faces on page one that would continue the next 50 years. The pages of the magazine became a bastion of rock and political journalism, with names such as John Landau, Cameron Crowe, and Hunter S. Thompson, with accompanying photography from masters like Annie Leibovitz and Mark Selinger. For a teenage boy growing up at the dawn of the new millennium, Rolling Stone was the culture kingmaker. I would read through each spread ferociously while being titillated by the scantily clad artists on the cover. It was 2001, and for a pubescent 8th grader like myself, these issues were practically Playboys in my hand. Beyond the cover and photo spreads, though, I was convinced that each statement found within the pages of that month's issue were considered gospel, that the words of its writers proclaimed the second, third, or even fourth coming of rock and roll gods.
Music, true music, not just rock and roll, it chooses you. It lives in your car or alone, listen to your headphones, with the vast scenic bridges and angelic choirs in your brain. It's a place apart from the vast, benign lap of America.
This was never more apparent than when I read through the magazine's list issues. Throughout the early aughts, Rolling Stone magazine was never one to shy away from putting together a top something list. Whether it be the 100 greatest rock singers of all time, the top 100 guitarists of all time, the 50 best songs within a genre, even the 50 coolest albums of all time. But there was one rankings list that stood above all others, my roadmap to rock and roll history, Rolling Stone magazine's top 500 greatest albums of all time. Scrolling through the pages of this particular issue, I felt like I was a young William Miller from Almost Famous, and I had just inherited my older sister's record collection. Page after page included artists and album covers, some I was familiar with and many I was not. I would begin collecting all of them. At first CDs picked up at Virgin Megastore, then later MP3s, and now full circle to the music format during the height of Rolling Stone magazine, vinyl. There's something truly special about listening to each track within the album. Each time you dropped the needle on track 1, side 1, you began a journey, and by the end I was often transformed. Unfortunately, that's not how music is produced and released these days. Sure, Adele 25 and Taylor Swift's 1989 generated massive sales, but would you declare either of these to be one of the greatest albums of all time? Don't just rely on my word. I couldn't say it any better than Stephen Hayden, whose recently published Twilight of the Gods, a book focused on the height of classic rock and its inevitable downfall. Hayden summed up this feeling perfectly. Albums still exist, but their existence feels precarious. Given the variety of different formats for music consumption, the album has been reduced to just another item on the menu. It is an artistic and economic construct that many listeners have outgrown. Sometimes I think that the only reason albums are still around is because artists still insist on making them. If the survival of the album format depended solely on the market, it would have been discarded long ago. Now he goes on to describe an incredibly humorous and spot-on analogy using Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights movie. You may know the scene, in which a wigged-out drug dealer, played by Alfred Molina, waves a gun at a gang of wigged-out porn stars, Mark Wahlberg, John C. Reilly, and Thomas Jane, who plan to rip him off. Before they can make their big move, however, the gang is forced to listen to Molina rant about how he hates being told how and in which order to play his favorite songs. This maniac would rather take Jesse's Girl from Rick Springfield's Working Class Dog and 99 Luftballons from Nina's 99 Luftballons and plug them into a totally awesome mixtape. This is how most people regard albums today. Listeners prefer the interactive musical experience of making a playlist versus the more passive construction of a ready-to-serve album. What passed for cokehead logic in the early 80s is now conventional wisdom.
I love that song.
Despite the album's current low standing, to me, the magic still exists in the long-form structure of what the album represents. And I want to explore more and revisit the list that inspired me years ago. As you can imagine, this list is not without its detractors, and I can only imagine what the outcry on Twitter would have been if the social platform was around when the 500 albums list was first published.
I read this quote when I was reading the comment section, right, for the albums, and somebody commented,
Uh-oh.
"Who made this list? Paul McCartney or Ringo? A Beatles-heavy mess with albums near 100 that belong in the top 10 needs a major upgrade with heavy folk, black, country, and jazz world voters to correct this complete mess."
Well, maybe I can imagine what Twitter would have to say. I mean, anytime I post an opinion about my music preference, I usually get a response that sounds something like this.
I'm feeling kind of basic today. Top 5 side ones, track ones. Janie Jones, Clash, from The Clash. Let's Get It On, Marvin Gaye from Let's Get It On. Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit off of Nevermind.
Oh no, Rob, that's not obvious enough. Not at all. How about Point of No Return on Point of No Return? Lewis, so you can get up...
Shut up. White Light, White Heat, Velvet Underground.
Okay, that would be on my list.
Though not on mine.
Massive Attack, No Protection. The song is Radiation Ruling the Nation.
Kind of a new record. Very... In a minute. Very nice, Rob. A sly declaration of new classic status slipped into a list of old safe ones. Very pussy.
Excuse me, I was
In a minute. Couldn't you be any more obvious than that, Rob? How about, I don't know, the Beatles? How about fucking Beethoven? Track 1, side 1 of the Fifth Symphony.
Music, especially what is popular or considered great, will always be divisive. Rolling Stone itself staked its flag on the corner of pop counterculture, fighting back against the 50s and early 60s show tunes and standards. But as the years went by, the torch eventually became a new generation. This cycle will continue on and on. The 500 greatest album list from Rolling Stone is a flawed list. But that doesn't dissuade me from investigating why others voted to have each title placed in the pantheon of rock history. I'm curious. I'm curious about each and every one of these titles, these albums, not only to listen to them, but understand the moments in which they were released. I invite you to join me on this journey as I re-examine Rolling Stone magazine's top 500 albums of all time list. Each week we will focus on one album, taking a deep dive into why it is considered one of the best of all time and how it defined pop culture and the recording industry itself. So join me if you will. Don't be afraid to subscribe to Chasing Rolling Stones today, and you'll be the first to receive updates on when new episodes drop.